I gave her my last dollar and I didn't even know her name." The words tore out of Nora Harper before she could stop them. October wind cut through Seattle's downtown district like a blade, bitter and dry, dead leaves skittering across rain-slicked pavement from earlier storms. She knelt on the cold concrete outside Lombardi's, that upscale Italian restaurant where candlelight flickered through frosted windows and power deals happened in leather booths. Her thin jacket, the only one she owned, wrapped around a small girl no older than 6, shivering violently in a soaked pink dress that clung to her small frame like a second skin of ice. Nora's hands, red and trembling from cold, pressed 78 crumpled dollar bills into the child's frozen fingers. $78. Every cent she had left in the world. The girl stared up with wide brown eyes, confused, terrified. "Find somewhere warm," Nora whispered, her breath visible in the October air. "Please. Go find somewhere warm tonight." What Nora did not know, the child was Emma Calabrese. What Nora did not know, the man watching from the candlelit back booth through the restaurant window, his dark eyes tracking every movement as she gave away her survival, was Aleandro Calabrese. The man who controlled every shadow in Seattle's underworld. His tailored black suit cost more than everything Nora owned. His gold watch alone was worth 3 years of her wages. He was 47 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. A permanent map of violence survived. And in that moment, watching a desperate woman kneel in the rain to warm a stranger's child, something shifted behind those dark, calculating eyes. What Nora did not know, her life had just changed forever. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning. 3 weeks earlier. To understand how a woman ended up with only $78 and a choice that would expose her to the most dangerous man in the city. The converted closet bedroom measured 8 feet by 6 feet. That was the charitable measurement. Nora Harper sat on the edge of a mattress so thin she could feel the wooden box spring beneath her, counting crumpled bills under a single lamplight. 27 years old but looking decades older. Dark brown hair pulled into a knot so tight it gave her headaches. Hollow cheekbones. Eyes the color of storm clouds, intelligent, defeated, watching. Her hands were calloused from 15 years of restaurant work, her nails broken from scrubbing, her fingers stained permanent yellow from bleach. $1. $5. Another 5. 10 more. Her lips moved silently as she counted. The lamp cast shadows across her face, deep and severe, like the shadows of a coffin. She had $78. Not 79. Not 80. 78. On the nightstand, a white envelope screamed at her in printed capital letters. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. $22,000 due in 14 days. $22,000. The number was impossible. It was a number that existed in other people's lives, other people's nightmares. Not hers. Except it was hers now. The house, inherited from her grandmother 6 months ago, was worth maybe $30,000. She had been 3 payments behind on property taxes when the lawyer's letter arrived. 3 payments she could not afford because Douglas Hale, the restaurant manager at Lombardi's where she worked double shifts, had stolen her tips for the last 4 months. Not stolen. That implied subtlety. He had simply taken them. Claimed she had miscounted. Claimed she was dishonest. Claimed that if she reported it, he would fire her on the spot, destroy her references, and make sure every restaurant in Seattle knew her name as a theft risk. She was 34 years into making minimum wage. She had no savings. She had no family left. She had this house that was killing her and $78 in crumpled bills that could not save it. The clock on the wall read 11:41 p.m. She had been counting her money for 3 hours. Not because she was slow at math. Because she kept hoping the answer would change. That somehow, impossibly, more money would appear between the bills. That the universe operated on mercy instead of mathematics. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the window in a rhythm like desperation. Like a fist against glass. Like something trying to break in. Nora placed the bills back in the envelope they had come from. She did not place them in a bank account because she had closed her bank account in July when the fees exceeded her balance. She kept them here. Physically. Where she could see them. Where she could pretend they meant something. The hospital bill sat beside the foreclosure notice. Another final notice. From St. Mary's Medical Center. Her mother's final hospital bill from 3 years ago. $11,000. She had paid what she could, then the hospital had written the rest off as uncollectible charity care. But the bill still arrived. Still taunted her. Still sat on her nightstand like a ghost that refused to leave. That bill was why she had no money. Not really Douglas Hale stealing her tips, though he was doing that too. The real reason was that she had spent everything, every dollar she had saved over 15 years, trying to keep her mother alive for 4 more months when the cancer reached stage 4. The doctors said her mother would not survive. But her mother was terrified of the dark, and Nora could not bear the thought of her mother dying alone in the dark, and so Nora had paid for the private room where the nurses came when you rang the bell. It had cost her future. It had cost her everything. And her mother had died anyway, on a Tuesday morning in March, holding Nora's hand. Now Nora paid for that love with $78 and an impossible deadline. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus coming home from her mother's funeral. She simply sat in the dark, listening to the rain, and felt the weight of everything pressing down like a stone on her chest. At Lombardi's, the evening shift was ending. Nora should have been there. She had called in sick for the first time in 2 years. She could not face Douglas Hale tonight. Could not face the way he watched her while she served tables. The way his hand lingered on her shoulder when he passed. The way he told her she was beautiful when he thought no one else was listening, and then he looked at her like she owed him something in return. 2 days ago, she had asked for a raise. A simple request. She had been working there for 6 years. Never missed a shift. Never complained. Never spoke back. Douglas had laughed. Not out of humor. Out of cruelty. "You are replaceable," he had said, voice like venom. "There are 50 girls waiting for your job. 50. And most of them would be grateful to work for a manager who appreciates them. Who takes care of them. You understand? I take care of the girls who understand the arrangement." The implication had hung in the air between them. The implication was clear. Nora had said nothing. Had walked away. Had decided that day that she would not be coming back, foreclosure or no foreclosure. That some lines, once crossed, meant you were no longer yourself. And now here she was. 27 years old. Facing $40,000 in debt. With $78 and 2 weeks. The rain drummed harder. The October wind howled like something wounded, and Nora Harper sat alone in her 8x6 room with the bills and the darkness and the absolute certainty that something had to break soon. That a human being could not sustain this pressure indefinitely. That eventually, the stone on her chest would press down so hard that there would be nothing left to press. Meanwhile, across the city, in the candlelit back booth at Lombardi's, a different kind of pressure was building. Aleandro Calabrese sat with his lieutenants, Rocco and Sal, discussing the supply chain problem that had emerged in the port district. A shipment had been intercepted. Questions were being asked. Nothing that could be traced back, but questions nonetheless. Rocco, thick-necked and scarred across his knuckles, leaned forward. The federal agents are sniffing around. Nothing concrete yet, but they're asking the right people the wrong questions. Aleandro listened with his chin resting on his fist, his dark eyes revealing nothing. Around them, the restaurant hummed with wealthy Seattle's evening. Expensive wine. Expensive clothes. Conversations that cost money to have and more money to keep secret. And Douglas? Aleandro asked, his voice deep and solid like an oath. What has he been doing? Sal, lean and dark-haired with a gold tooth that caught the candlelight, exchanged a glance with Rocco. Skimming. Tips, mostly. Small amounts. The waitresses are too afraid to report it. Aleandro did not respond immediately. He studied the wine in his glass like it contained answers. His men knew better than to interrupt silence. Silence, in Aleandro's presence, meant he was thinking. And his thinking often preceded decisions that changed entire lives. The small man who steals tips, Aleandro said finally, shows you his character. Shows you that he has not learned that everything carries a cost. Everything carries consequences. A man who steals from desperate women is telling you he does not fear consequences. He raised his eyes to Sal. Find out who Douglas Hale is. Find out what he wants. Find out what he fears. And then we will decide what to do with him. Rocco and Sal nodded. They had learned long ago not to ask why Aleandro cared about a restaurant manager's small theft. They had learned that Aleandro's attention, once focused on something, was like a spotlight that revealed everything in its path. What neither man understood was that Aleandro Calabrese had not been focused on Douglas Hale at all. He had been focused on a woman they did not know, kneeling in the rain outside his restaurant, giving away her survival to a child whose name he had whispered to himself every day since his brother had been murdered 16 years ago. Emma. The child's name was Emma. She looked exactly like his brother's daughter would have looked if she had lived. Same brown eyes. Same small frame. Same way of trusting the world despite every reason not to. He had brought her back into his life 6 months ago, quietly, carefully, through a network of lawyers and paperwork that no one could trace. He had placed her in a private school. Ensured her safety. Watched her grow. And he had never once let her know that her father was dead because of a blood debt that Aleandro had not yet settled. And then tonight, his daughter, for she was his daughter in every way that mattered, even if the paperwork said otherwise, had wandered out into the October rain, frightened and confused, and a desperate woman had knelt on cold concrete and given her everything. Aleandro Calabrese, a man who had not wept in 16 years, felt something crack open in his chest. Something dangerous and cold and completely unstoppable. What changed everything was a phone call that came at midnight. Nora's phone rang as she was finally attempting to sleep. She did not recognize the number. In her experience, unknown numbers at midnight brought bad news, but she answered anyway because bad news was now her default state. Miss Harper? A woman's voice. Professional. Clipped. This is Patricia Chen from First National Bank. We have accelerated the foreclosure timeline. You have 7 days, not 14. 7 days to vacate the property. I have paperwork being sent to you first thing in the morning. Nora could not speak. 7 days. The number would not fit in her head. Do you understand? The woman asked. Yes, Nora whispered. I understand. 7 days. After that, the property belongs to the bank. The line went dead. Nora sat in the darkness and felt the stone on her chest grow heavier. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Nora Harper sat on the edge of her converted closet bedroom in the Ashford mansion at 2:48 in the morning, counting money under a flickering lamp that cast shadows across her trembling hands. 78 crumpled bills. She recounted them again, 76, 77, 78, hoping the number would somehow shift, would somehow become enough. On her nightstand sat a foreclosure notice stamped in angry red letters. Amount due, $22,000. Due date, 14 days. 14 days. She was a live-in nanny for Victoria Ashford, Seattle's wealthiest real estate developer, a woman who wore designer suits that cost more than Nora earned in 6 months and spoke to her as though she were furniture that occasionally required speaking to. Nora worked 14-hour days in this mansion, caring for children who called her the help, sleeping in a space barely larger than the bedroom closet it used to be, pouring everything into raising kids who would forget her name the moment she was gone. Her salary, $800 a week, before taxes. $800 a week to fight a $22,000 tide. The foreclosure was on her childhood home 3 states away, the only thing left after her parents died, drowning now in medical debt she had inherited like a curse that could not be erased. Hospital bills. Funeral costs. Taxes on property she could not afford to keep. The numbers had multiplied across 7 years until they became a thing with teeth, and now those teeth were closing around her, and she was running out of time. To survive, Nora worked double shifts at Lombardi's restaurant, Seattle's premier Italian establishment where the wealthy dined on $100 steaks and sipped wine that cost $70 a glass while she cleared tables and scrubbed floors and smiled through exhaustion so complete it became part of her face. She moved through those dining rooms like a ghost, quiet and faithful and invisible. Her manager was a man named Douglas Hale, 47 years old, with pale eyes that held no kindness and a voice like grinding glass. He had been stealing her tips for months, pocketing cash left on tables, shorting her envelopes, claiming customers didn't tip when Nora knew they had because she saw the bills being left, saw them disappear. When she confronted him once, Douglas leaned close, his breath hot and sour, and he said words that locked her in place, "Report me and you're fired." Try me. She needed both jobs. She could not afford to lose either one. She said nothing. The morning shift at the Ashford mansion started before dawn. Nora arrived at 6 o'clock, her uniform pressed, her hair pulled back, her face already arranged into the expression Victoria Ashford expected, invisible. Victoria was in the kitchen when Nora entered, sitting in silk pajamas at a marble counter, sipping coffee from a cup that cost more than Nora's weekly salary. She did not look up. The children vomited in their bathroom, Victoria said, waving a hand as though brushing away a fly. Clean it before breakfast. They cannot see mess like that. It is disturbing. Of course, Nora said. And do not use that bleach smell. It is common. Nora climbed the stairs to the children's bathroom, her knees already aching, her body running on 4 hours of sleep and 1 protein bar she had saved from the day before. The tile was cold beneath her knees as she scrubbed. The smell of sickness mixed with cleaning solution. She thought of the foreclosure notice. She thought of her childhood bedroom. She thought of the hospital bill that started everything, the one that came after her mother's final surgery, the one marked in red letters, "Final Notice." That afternoon, she changed clothes and took the bus to Lombardi's. The restaurant was dark inside, cool, elegant, the kind of place where people came to discuss deals that involved millions of dollars and futures that had already been decided. Nora tied on her apron. Douglas Hale was at the host stand, reviewing reservations, his pale eyes flicking toward her with something like amusement. "Harper," he said. "Table 7 needs water. And do not spill anything today. I am tired of watching you waste our resources." "Yes, sir," she said. The dinner service began, and Seattle's elite filed in, their laughter carrying across the dining room, their clothes carrying price tags she could not fathom. She moved between tables with practiced grace, pouring wine, clearing plates, remembering who wanted lemon and who preferred their water without ice. A businessman at table 4 left a $20 bill under his plate. She saw it. She noted the crisp bill, the clear intention to tip. When she cleared the table 15 minutes later, Douglas appeared at her shoulder, blocking her path. He lifted the bill from under the plate before her fingers reached it. "This pays for the glass you broke last week," he said, smirking, pocketing the money. "Seems fair." She had not broken a glass last week. They both knew this. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing because nothing would change anything. She needed this job. $78 sat in her room. $22,000 sat on her nightstand in red letters. The night deepened. Rain began to fall against the restaurant windows, October rain that came in cold and relentless, the kind of rain that made the city feel smaller and darker. Nora was finishing her shift, her feet screaming, her back bent from leaning over tables all evening, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her emergency contact at the bank, the one they used when they needed to accelerate collections: "Call us tomorrow. Urgent." She clocked out at 11:30. The rain fell harder as she waited for the bus, soaking through her thin jacket, the cold cutting through her like a blade wrapped in ice. The bus took 40 minutes to arrive. She sat in the back seat, watching the city pass, watching neighborhoods shift from wealthy to struggling, watching the distance between worlds widen with every block. Her phone was dead. Her stomach was empty. She had eaten crackers for lunch and nothing since. Tomorrow she would wake at 5:30 and do it all again. Tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, and in 14 days, none of it would matter because she would have nothing. The rain hammered on the bus roof. A sound like a countdown. Like a clock ticking toward something she could not stop. She did not know that on this exact night, in the private back booth at Lombardi's, a man named Aleandro Calabrese was finishing his dinner, a man whose name carried weight in certain circles, a man who owned restaurants and construction companies and properties across the Pacific Northwest, a man whose regular table sat in candlelight where power conversations shaped Seattle's underworld. She did not know that his eyes had followed her throughout the evening as she moved through the dining room. She did not know that he had watched her when Douglas Hale stole her tip. She did not know that he had noted the moment her face shifted, just for 1 second, when the money disappeared. The moment she thought no one was watching. Rocco and Sal sat across from him, his oldest lieutenants, men who had worked for him for 15 years, and when they glanced up from their plates, they saw something in their boss's expression they could not quite name. Something cold. Something dangerous. Something that would change everything in the weeks to come. But Nora Harper knew none of this. She only knew rain and exhaustion and the number 78, and she only knew that tomorrow, when that bank called, she would have to answer and hear words she had already heard in her nightmares. She only knew that sometimes the world was so heavy you could not carry it anymore, and still you woke up and tried. The rain fell harder. The bus moved through the darkness. And somewhere in a candlelit booth, a man made a decision that would alter the course of 2 lives, neither knowing that the other existed, both standing at the edge of a cliff neither could see. The morning after everything changed, Nora Harper woke on the couch of her converted closet bedroom, the coat still draped across her shoulders, expensive wool against her worn skin. Outside her window, Seattle's rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed clean and gray. She didn't sleep. Not really. She had lain awake counting the hours until noon, when Sal would have details, when she would report to Lombardi's, when whatever came next would begin. Her phone buzzed at 6:08 a.m. A text from an unknown number, an address in Pioneer Square, a black SUV waiting at 11:08 a.m., the instruction to bring nothing but herself. No questions. No delays. Nora read the message 3 times. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. She looked around her tiny room, the foreclosure notice still pinned to the wall like a countdown timer, the hospital bill marked final notice stuffed into a mason jar on the nightstand, the cramped space that had been her entire world for the past 8 months. She had $78 now, minus the $78 she'd given to Emma. She had nothing. And somehow, that made what was about to happen feel inevitable, like gravity pulling her toward a cliff she couldn't see. At 11:15 a.m., a black SUV pulled to the curb outside her apartment building. The driver was silent, offering no greeting, just a nod toward the back seat. Nora sat with Aleandro's coat folded on her lap, still holding his warmth. The car moved through Seattle streets in near silence, just the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement. They arrived at a 5-story building downtown, the kind of place that existed just outside the city's main consciousness, unremarkable and purposeful. Sal was waiting in a conference room on the 3rd floor. Tall windows overlooked Elliott Bay. A single table. 2 chairs. A folder. "Sit," Sal said. His voice was thin, precise, like a knife cutting through tissue. He opened the folder. Inside were papers, an employment contract, tax forms, direct deposit authorization. "You work for Lombardi's now. Head server, day shift, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Salary is $3,200 per month plus benefits. Health insurance starts immediately." Nora's eyes widened. $3,200 a month. That was more than double what she made at the Ashford house and the restaurant combined. There are conditions, Sal continued. His pale eyes never blinked. You tell no one what you do, where you work, who you work for. You speak to no one about the restaurant's private clients. You maintain absolute discretion. He leaned forward slightly. You understand what discretion means? Yes, Nora whispered. It means you forget what you see. You forget what you hear. You don't mention names to friends. You don't post on social media. You become a vault. Sal tilted his head. Can you be a vault? Yes. Your foreclosure, Sal said, flipping a page. $22,000. By the end of this week, it will be paid. Your name will be removed from the notice. The property is yours. He slid a piece of paper toward her. A bank transfer confirmation. $22,000. The account holder's name was obscured, but the date was this morning. Consider it a signing bonus. Nora couldn't breathe. The foreclosure paid. Her apartment secured. She looked at Sal, searching for understanding, for the catch, for the moment this would reverse. Why? She asked. Sal closed the folder with deliberate slowness. Because Mr. Calabrese values loyalty. And you demonstrated loyalty to his daughter without knowing who she was. That kind of character is rare. He stood. You start tomorrow. 9 a.m. Douglas Hale will not be present. He's no longer employed with us. The words hit like a shock. Douglas Hale, gone. Just like that. As if Aleandro had simply erased him. What happened to him? Nora asked. That's not your concern, Sal said. His tone suggested the conversation was finished. That evening, Nora sat in her apartment and opened her laptop. She searched for Douglas Hale. Nothing recent. Then she searched news about Lombardi's. On the Seattle Tribune website, there was a 3-paragraph article, Local Restaurant Manager Arrested on Embezzlement Charges. The article mentioned that Douglas Hale had been accused of stealing over $47,000 from servers' tips over an 8-month period. Federal investigators were involved. He was being held without bail, pending trial. She read it twice. She didn't know how Aleandro had done it. She didn't know if it had actually happened or if it was simply the appearance of happening. But Douglas Hale was gone. The next morning, Nora arrived at Lombardi's at 8:45 a.m. The restaurant was different during daylight, softer somehow, less intimidating. The dining room was empty. The back booth was just a booth. Sal was waiting by the host stand with a black uniform and shoes that actually fit. Change in the employee bathroom, Sal instructed. Then come find me. The uniform fit perfectly. Nora looked at herself in the mirror, still tired, still worn, but somehow different. Something had shifted. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere. The first week was a revelation. The day shift served businessmen and professional women, tourists and retired couples. Nora took orders, served wine, cleared plates. But every Tuesday and Friday night, at 7 p.m., Aleandro Calabrese entered through the back door. He sat in his booth with Rocco and Sal and sometimes other men whose names Nora learned not to ask. She served his table like she served the others, professionally, invisibly, perfectly. Except Aleandro always noticed her. On the third Friday, as Nora poured wine for his table, his hand caught her wrist gently. Not hard. Not threatening. Just enough to pause her mid-motion. Your apartment, he said quietly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. You're still living there? Yes, Nora said. Her pulse quickened at his touch. Good, he said. He released her. Keep it safe. That was all. But it was enough to confirm something Nora had been trying not to believe. This wasn't random. This wasn't charity. This was intention. 2 weeks into her new employment, Nora was closing the restaurant at 5 p.m. when Aleandro walked out of his booth. The rest of the dining room was empty, just her and Rocco cleaning tables nearby. "Come with me," Aleandro said. Nora followed him through the kitchen, out the back door, into an alley where the same black SUV waited. She got in without question. They drove for 30 minutes through Seattle's hills until they arrived at a house, not a mansion exactly, but substantial, modern, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. Inside, Emma was waiting, drawing at a kitchen table, her small face lighting up when she saw Nora. "Nora," she shrieked, running to throw her arms around Nora's waist. Aleandro watched from across the kitchen. "My sister was supposed to be watching her," he said quietly. "There was a miscommunication. Emma ended up on the street." His jaw tightened at the memory. She could have died. From cold. From predation. From any number of things. "She's okay now," Nora said softly, still holding Emma, who had started showing Nora her drawings, pictures of clouds and rain and a stick-figure woman with long hair. "Because of you," Aleandro said. "You were a stranger. You could have walked past. Most people do." He moved closer, and Nora's breath caught. This close, she could see the scar cutting through his eyebrow more clearly, could see that his eyes weren't black but dark brown, almost amber in the late afternoon light. Most people calculate. They think about their own problems. They think about why something isn't their responsibility. "She was cold," Nora said simply. "Yes," Aleandro said. "She was cold. And you gave her everything you had." He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from Nora's face. The touch was gentle. Careful. Like he was afraid she might break. "I need to understand something. Why did you?" "Because," Nora said, her voice barely audible, "she was scared. And I know what that's like." Something shifted in Aleandro's expression. Something cold and dangerous transformed into something else entirely. Pain, maybe. Recognition. "Stay," he said. It wasn't a request. "Stay for dinner. I want Emma to know you. I want—" He stopped, as if he'd almost revealed something he hadn't planned to say. "I want you to know her," he finished. "Know us." Nora stayed. She stayed through dinner, pasta made by a private chef, wine poured in real glasses, Emma chattering between them about school and drawing and her favorite color, which was the color of rain on window glass. When it was time to leave, Aleandro walked her to the SUV. The sun was setting over the Sound, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "This isn't normal," Nora said, unable to stop the words. "What's happening here?" "It isn't normal." "No," Aleandro agreed. "It isn't." "I don't understand the rules," Nora continued. "I don't understand what you want from me." Aleandro was quiet for a long moment. The city stretched around them, lights beginning to glow as darkness fell. "Neither do I," he finally said. "But I know that when you see someone in the darkness, you don't ignore them. You reach out." He looked at her directly. "You reached out to Emma. I'm asking you to let me reach out to you." The SUV drove through Seattle's night streets, and Nora sat in the back seat holding the image of Aleandro's face, trying to understand what was happening to her, knowing only that her life had split into before and after, and that she was standing at the threshold between two worlds, unable to fully step back into the first one, terrified to step forward into the second. What neither of them knew was that Victoria Ashford had seen Nora leaving the Ashford house in Aleandro's coat 3 weeks earlier. That she had made phone calls. That she was preparing her own response to a young woman who had somehow caught the attention of a man Victoria had been trying to seduce for years. And what neither Nora nor Aleandro knew was that Douglas Hale, sitting in a federal holding cell, was not actually guilty of what he'd been arrested for. That he had been framed. That Aleandro had orchestrated every detail of his downfall. Because that was what happened when someone hurt a person under Aleandro Calabrese's protection, even accidentally. Even before they knew they were under his protection. The real test of Nora's loyalty was still coming. And it would demand everything from her. The private office was so quiet you could hear the second-hand ticking on the wall clock. Nora held the check in trembling hands, staring at the numbers printed in perfect black ink, $22,000. Exactly what she needed. Exactly what she didn't deserve. "I don't understand," she whispered. Aleandro Calabrese stood at the window behind his mahogany desk, his silhouette framed against the gray Seattle afternoon. Rain drummed against the glass like 1,000 impatient fingers. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her wages, and when he turned, his dark eyes held something she couldn't name. "You gave Emma your last $78, he said. Not a question. A statement of fact, delivered like a judge pronouncing sentence. I didn't know who she was." "Exactly." Rocco stood motionless by the door, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his expression twisted in something between shock and disbelief. In 15 years of standing in that office, watching his boss command empires and destroy enemies with the flick of a wrist, he had never heard Aleandro Calabrese speak to anyone like this. Like Nora might be made of glass. "The foreclosure notice on your nightstand," Aleandro continued, moving from the window toward his desk. "Your parents died 2 years ago. The hospital bills kept coming. You've been working double shifts at Lombardi's for 8 months, and Douglas Hale has stolen approximately $4,000 of your tips. He knew you wouldn't report him. He counted on your fear." Nora's face burned. How did he know these things? How had he peeled back every layer of her private suffering and read it like an open book? "Victoria Ashford pays you $12 an hour for 14-hour days," Aleandro said, settling into his leather chair. "She calls it a salary position to avoid overtime laws. You haven't had a day off in 6 months. You're 28 years old and you look 40. The words landed like stones. Nora's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because people should know they're being seen," Aleandro said quietly. "Before I help them, they should understand that I know exactly what they're suffering through. There's no mystery. No hidden agenda. Just the truth." He slid the check across the desk toward her. It made a soft whispering sound against the polished wood. "This is charity," Nora said, not reaching for it. "I can't accept charity. I won't be anyone's." "It's not charity," Aleandro interrupted, and something in his tone, not harsh, but immovable, made her stop. "You helped my daughter when you had no obligation. When you had every reason to walk past her. Instead, you gave away your survival. Do you understand how rare that is?" Nora shook her head slowly. "In my world," Aleandro continued, "everyone calculates. Every interaction is a transaction. People weigh what they can gain against what they must give, and they choose carefully. I've spent 20 years watching men and women prove that everyone has a price." He paused, and in that pause was something that looked like pain. "Then I watched you kneel in the October rain without hesitation. Without angle. Without strategy." He stood and moved around the desk, stopping close enough that Nora could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark, like sandalwood and smoke. "You're not nobody," he said. "You stopped being nobody the moment you reached out to Emma. I'm asking you to accept that someone sees you. Not as a servant. Not as invisible. But as someone whose actions matter." Nora's hand shook as she reached for the check. The moment her fingers touched the paper, something shifted inside her chest. Like a door opening to a room she didn't know existed. That night, she returned to the Ashford mansion for what she didn't know would be her final shift as a servant in that house. The November wind howled outside the tall windows as Victoria Ashford's dinner party unfolded on the West Terrace, Seattle's elites circling each other like sharks, their laughter sharp and practiced, their wines expensive enough to cost more than Nora's monthly rent. Victoria summoned her to the kitchen at 8:24 p.m. Nora knew the exact time because she'd been counting down the hours until she could leave. "You embarrass me," Victoria said, her voice wrapped in ice. She wore a cream silk dress that clung to her thin frame, her blonde hair arranged in a style that probably took 2 hours and a team of professionals. "One of my guests mentioned seeing you yesterday wearing an expensive men's coat." A cashmere coat, they said. Who are you sleeping with, Nora? Heat flooded Nora's face. The coat was Aleandro's. He'd placed it on her shoulders when she left Lombardy's 3 nights ago, seeing her shivering in the October cold. She'd worn it for exactly 7 minutes before removing it at the mansion gates and carrying it folded over her arm like contraband. It's not what you think, Nora began. Victoria's hand rose, cutting her off. I don't care what it is. What I care about is that you're a pathetic little nothing, and nothing has reminded you of your place. You're the help. You will always be the help. And tomorrow, you're fired. She turned away, but then something seemed to occur to her, something cruel and gleeful. Victoria walked to the guest dining room and returned with Nora's thin jacket, the one Emma had been wearing the day they met. It smelled faintly of rain and children's shampoo. Victoria held it up by 2 fingers, dangling it like a dead animal. Everyone, she called out, and the guests on the terrace quieted, turning to watch. Come see what poverty looks like. They shuffled inside, wine glasses in hand, curious and predatory. Victoria stretched the jacket wide, displaying the fraying hem, the worn cuffs, the faded stains that no amount of washing could remove. This is what happens when you don't apply yourself, Victoria said, her voice dripping with theatrical sympathy. This is what you wear when you have nothing. When you've failed at life so completely that you end up serving people like us. The guests laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. Nora stood frozen, every nerve screaming, her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew crescents of blood from her palms. But Victoria Ashford didn't know what was standing in the shadows of her own home. Sal had been invited to that dinner party under the name Marco Bernadetti, a fabricated venture capitalist interested in Victoria's charitable foundation. He'd spent the evening with a phone in his jacket pocket, its camera lens pointed at Victoria's face, recording every word she spoke. Every insult. Every cruelty. Every moment she'd held up Nora's jacket like evidence of moral failure. 11 blocks away, at Lombardy's restaurant, the evening service was in full swing. The dining room smelled of garlic and oregano, of money and power, of the specific perfume that clung to people accustomed to getting what they wanted. Douglas Hale moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. He'd been stealing from servers for 8 months. No one had reported him. No one would. At 9:13 p.m., the front door opened. 12 men walked in, each dressed in identical black suits, each moving with synchronized precision. The restaurant fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused midway to mouths. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as these men moved through it like a dark current, parting the sea of diners without speaking, without acknowledging anyone. Aleandro Calabrese walked between them. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had never questioned his right to occupy space. His charcoal suit was immaculate. His watch, a Patek Philippe worth more than a car, caught the light as he raised his hand, gesturing toward the kitchen. The gesture was almost casual. Almost polite. Douglas Hale emerged from the kitchen doorway, and the color drained from his face like water from a broken vessel. Mr. Calabrese, he stammered, his voice too high, too fast, the voice of a small animal sensing the predator. How can I help you this evening? You've been stealing, Aleandro said. His voice was quiet, but it traveled through the silent restaurant like a blade. From your servers. From people who work 14-hour days for minimum wage. From people who can't afford to fight back. From Nora Harper, you've stolen approximately $4,000. Douglas shook his head frantically, his entire body trembling. No, there's been a misunderstanding, I would never. You threatened her employment, Aleandro continued, stepping closer. Rain pounded against the restaurant's windows now, a percussion track to what was happening inside. You told her you'd fire her if she reported you. You used her desperation as leverage. You calculated that she was too afraid to do anything about it. Douglas collapsed to his knees, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't keep them still. Please, he whispered. Please, I can explain. I can pay it back. I'll repay every dollar. The front door exploded open. FBI agents in tactical gear flooded through, their boots loud on the hardwood floor, their jackets marked with yellow letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation. 6 of them, moving with military efficiency, their eyes locked on Douglas Hale kneeling on the ground. Douglas Hale, the lead agent called, her voice sharp and official. "You're under arrest for wage theft, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The restaurant erupted. Diners scrambled backward, chairs scraping loudly. Servers froze. Cell phones appeared as people began recording, sensing they were witnessing something significant. The agents hauled Douglas to his feet, his body limp with shock, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The click of handcuffs sounded like a coffin lid closing. Cameras flashed, news crews positioned perfectly outside, their vans already parked, their presence no accident. "No!" Douglas screamed as they dragged him toward the door. "No, this is a mistake. This is a mistake. I didn't. But his words were swallowed by the sound of rain and sirens and the professional murmur of journalists preparing their stories. Within minutes, he would be on every local news broadcast, the manager of the city's most prestigious Italian restaurant, arrested for wage theft, his face twisted with terror and confusion, his life disintegrating in real time. Aleandro watched from his booth, his expression unreadable. Rocco stood beside him, a hand on the back of the chair, his shock slowly transforming into something like recognition. 40 years, Sal said quietly, appearing from nowhere as he always did. Federal minimum on the embezzlement charges. The FBI's been building the case for 8 months. The charges connected him to the Moretti family's money laundering operation. Your information closed it. Aleandro nodded slowly, his dark eyes fixed on the empty space where Douglas had knelt. Too quick to kill him, he said softly. Too easy. Too merciful. Let him rot in a cage knowing everyone saw him broken. The next morning arrived cold and clear. FBI agents with a warrant arrived at the gates of the Ashford mansion at 6:16 a.m. They had warrants for financial records, employment contracts, and tax filings. They had recordings. They had testimony from 12 employees describing systematic wage theft, illegal schedule practices, and violations of labor law stretching back 6 years. Victoria Ashford, still in her silk nightgown, her face unmade and therefore unprotected, stared at the badges with the kind of confusion usually reserved for people who believed the laws applied to everyone except them. "This is absurd," she said, her voice trembling with outrage. "Do you have any idea who I am? My family has contributed millions to this city. My father was." "We know exactly who you are," the lead agent said. She was younger than Victoria, competent, unmoved by the wealth surrounding her. "We have recordings of you discussing wage theft with your house manager. We have documentation of falsified employment contracts. We have testimony." They led her out of her mansion in handcuffs, her perfect facade shattering like glass. Her hair was uncombed. Her skin looked grey without makeup. She screamed as cameras captured every moment, every elegant neighbor watching from windows and driveways. "This is because of her!" Victoria shrieked, her voice raw with rage. "That pathetic little nanny! She did this! She—" But Nora wasn't there to hear it. Nora was in Aleandro's office, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seattle's skyline. Rain had stopped. The afternoon sun was breaking through clouds, turning the wet streets below into mirrors that reflected gold light. "What happens now?" Nora asked. Aleandro turned from his desk, and for the first time, she saw his expression completely open, no guard, no calculation, nothing but something raw and almost fragile in his dark eyes. "Now you take the check," he said. "You save your home. You rebuild your life. And you understand that you're no longer invisible." He moved closer, and Nora realized she wasn't afraid. The rain began again outside, soft and patient, and somewhere in that sound was the promise of what comes after storms. "What I don't understand," Nora said, "is why you're still here." Aleandro smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Because, he said, sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 5 months after that October night when rain fell like a blessing and kindness broke through ice, Nora Harper stood on the rooftop of Aleandro Calabrese's downtown building. Seattle spread below them, the city transformed by December, clean lines of light, wet streets reflecting gold, everything softened by winter's approach. She could feel the cold air against her skin, sharp and honest. Behind them, the wind moved through the architectural steel with a sound like breathing. Emma was asleep 15 floors below, warm in Aleandro's penthouse, her small hands curled around the stuffed rabbit Nora had bought her last week. The child had stopped asking when Nora was coming back. Now she simply expected her. That shift in expectation, from hope to certainty, had changed something in Nora that she couldn't name. "I have something to tell you," Aleandro said. Nora turned to face him. The December wind caught her hair, and she didn't pull it back. 6 months ago, she would have. 6 months ago, she would have made herself smaller, tried to take up less space. Now she stood tall, shoulders back, meeting his eyes directly. "Douglas Hale was sentenced today," he said quietly. 40 years federal prison. He'll be 78 when he gets out, if he survives that long. Nora absorbed this without moving. The FBI raid had happened at dawn 3 months earlier, black SUVs rolling into Lombardi's restaurant at 5:53 in the morning, agents moving through the building like shadows with badges. Douglas Hale screaming as they cuffed him, his face raw with panic and rage. Every news channel had run the footage. Seattle had watched his carefully constructed life collapse in real time. His face was everywhere, Nora said softly. "I saw it in the grocery store." People pointed and whispered. 40 years is not mercy, Aleandro said. It's mathematics. It's understanding that some damage takes a lifetime to repair. Some theft can only be repaid through suffering. "And Victoria?" Nora asked. 22 years, Aleandro said. Her mansion seized for back taxes she ignored for a decade. Her bank accounts frozen. Her social circle abandoned her the moment the scandal broke. She has nothing. No family willing to claim her. No friends remaining. Just a cell and the knowledge that every person she humiliated is watching her fall. Nora felt something move through her, not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of equilibrium being restored. Victoria Ashford had spent 15 years making Nora feel invisible, had stolen her wages, had humiliated her in front of guests, had treated her like a piece of furniture to be moved around at will. Now Victoria understood what it felt like to be erased. Understood the weight of invisibility. "They hurt so many people," Nora said. "They did," Aleandro agreed. "And now they'll pay for it. Not quickly. Not easily. Not mercifully. They'll rot in cages while the people they destroyed rebuild their lives." He paused. "You rebuilt yours." Nora smiled. The transformation had been gradual, then sudden, then irreversible. 3 months after she quit both jobs, she'd moved into her own apartment, a real place with actual rooms, not a converted closet. She'd bought clothes that fit. She'd slept 8 full hours for the first time since childhood. The foreclosure notice on her childhood home had been stamped paid in full, a weight lifted that she'd carried for 2 years like a stone in her chest. Working at Aleandro's foundation had changed everything. Managing the charitable organization meant stepping into spaces where she was valued for her mind, not her labor. Where her opinions mattered. Where she stood at meetings as an equal, not a servant hovering in the background. The work fed her in ways her old jobs never had. She helped families avoid eviction. She connected children with medical care they couldn't afford. She saw her old self in every person she helped and recognized that kindness wasn't weakness, it was the rarest form of strength. "You would have rebuilt it anyway," Aleandro said now. "That's who you are. Someone who survives." "I'm not that strong," Nora said. "You gave away your last $78, Aleandro replied. "You had nothing left and you gave it anyway. That isn't survival. That's transcendence." He moved closer, and the space between them charged with months of careful distance collapsing. Rocco and Sal had noticed weeks ago the way their boss softened when Nora entered a room, the way he asked her opinions about foundation decisions, the way he smiled at her jokes with genuine warmth instead of the thin, controlled expression he showed everyone else. That night, Aleandro continued, when I watched you give Emma your last dollars, I thought I was watching charity. Pity. Something I could understand and categorize into a box with all the other transactions I've made in my life. He shook his head. But it wasn't a transaction. It was kindness. Pure kindness with no angle, no calculation, no expectation of return. His voice deepened. And it broke something in me. Something that had been frozen since my brother's betrayal. Nora's breath caught. Aleandro had told her about Marco weeks earlier, how his own brother had sold their family to the Moretti clan for $200,000, how 12 of their people had died, how Aleandro had made an impossible choice between mercy and survival. He'd given Marco a choice, disappear forever or face consequences. Marco had run and lasted 6 months before the Morettis found him. I'm not a good man, Nora, Aleandro said now. I've done things that would horrify you. I've made choices I can't undo. I've ordered people to do unforgivable things. I live in shadows and violence and calculation. He reached out, touching her face gently. His fingers were warm despite the December cold. But when I'm with you, I remember there's light, he said. There's goodness. There's people who act from their hearts instead of their minds. Nora reached up, meeting his touch halfway. You're not the monster you think you are. Monsters don't raise daughters who believe in heroes. Monsters don't spend months making sure someone is strong enough to stand as an equal before they confess their feelings. Something in his expression cracked, raw and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Aleandro Calabrese, who controlled every muscle of his face, who'd spent 15 years showing nothing but calculation and control, looked at her like she'd just given him everything. I waited because I needed you to be ready, he said. To be rebuilt. To be able to walk away if you chose to. I'm not walking away, Nora said. I'm choosing to stay. Choosing you. Choosing this. He kissed her then, soft and careful, months of restrained feeling finally released. When they broke apart, both were smiling, not the careful, measured expressions they showed the world, but genuine, unguarded happiness. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life, Aleandro said quietly. Mine, or yours? Nora asked. Both, he said. Both our lives changed that night. The rooftop door burst open. Emma stood there in pink pajamas, her dark eyes wide with confusion and hope. Rocco appeared behind her, apologetic. Sorry, boss, she woke up Anne. But Emma had already launched herself at Nora, who caught her easily, laughing. The child wrapped her arms around Nora's neck with the absolute trust of someone who'd learned that this person always caught her. Nora, are you staying for breakfast? Emma asked hopefully. Nora looked at Aleandro, who was watching them both with an expression that could only be called love. A man carved from ice and violence, looking at a child and a woman he'd pulled from desperation, and finally understanding what his empire had been protecting, not power, but the people he loved. Yes, Nora said. I'm staying. This story reminds us that true kindness, the kind that costs you everything, the kind that comes without calculation or expectation, has the power to change lives in ways you cannot imagine. Nora didn't help Emma because she knew who the child was. She helped because it was right. That single act of pure goodness broke through years of betrayal and calculation to reach a man who'd forgotten people like her existed. Your kindness matters. Your compassion matters. The hand you reach out when you have nothing left to give might be exactly the hand someone needs to pull themselves up. It might be the hand that changes not just their life, but yours. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness still exists in this world. Subscribe to this channel because every day we bring you stories about people who refuse to let the darkness win, people who choose compassion even when it costs them everything. Drop a comment telling us about a time someone's kindness changed your life, or a time your kindness changed someone else's. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. We have another story coming tomorrow that will shake you to your core. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.